Have you ever noticed how actually insane the Monster Hunter Try intro cinematic is? You have an entire pack of Jaggy led by a great Jaggy hunting down an entire herd of Aptonoth on a thin cliff edge by an ocean, followed up by Ludroth leaping out the water to nip at their heels, and then the most unfortunate and instant severe case of thalassophobia you've ever seen develop as this poor little thing gets devoured by a Ludroth, only for Lagaicrus to then interrupt the entire experience. But that's okay, he's in the ocean, right? He's not going to actually interfere with anything. The Great Jaggy's about to get his prize, and then, oh no, it's Rathalos. He's actually here now, and he's just stolen a whole ass Aptonoth, which he now has to protect from the pack of Jaggy and the Great Jaggy, while the rest of the Aptonoth use this opportunity to sacrifice their friend to escape with their lives. God, aren't they lovely? The fire's doing its work, but then, oh, the water god's here with Lagaicrus making himself known, and Rathalos is like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? They have a little bit of a yelling match, and then Lagaicrus has the overwhelming, crushing, sad realization that he can't fly. So he just flops himself back into the ocean. And breathe. Now, you might be sat there going, okay, yeah, I've seen the cinematic. There's a lot happening. Okay, what are you telling us this for? What are you doing? Well, firstly, I'm allowed to have fun with a fun cinematic. Secondly, it really highlights how incredibly well said cinematics do at conveying the beautiful chaos and ecology of this incredible world that has been created. But thirdly, I think it represents the real kind of impact that Monster Hunter Try has left in its legacy. Because I feel like out of all of the Monster Hunter games that exist, Try, and subsequently 3 Ultimate, of course, are probably the most divisive. I think they have some of the most intense fondness for them, and some of the most extreme, well, let's just forget about those that have occurred. And I think that's really interesting to examine. But what I would like to apply it to, what I think is certainly interesting, is something that I said for just a little brief moment last week. Or maybe you just go crazy and don't put any returning monster in, though that would be a little bit off-piste, and perhaps is something worth considering all on its own. And I was like, actually, that is quite a fun little thought. And when you think about a Monster Hunter game that has no returning monsters and all new monsters, well, only one can come to mind, Monster Hunter Try. It had 15 new monsters and only 3 returning, the required Rathalos and Rathian, and then a token Diablos. That is quite an extreme ratio, and something that's essentially not happened before or since. World had a heavy amount of new, 18 to 12 returning, 9 if we exclude subspecies, but that's still fairly even compared to 15 to 3. And I have to wonder then, is it the monster roster that causes such division when casting our minds back to the time of the sea? And obviously, no, it can't be, because Try gave us some of the most beloved monsters ever that have remained absolutely staple legends to this day. Things like, Deviljho. Things like, Lagaicrus, which I'm pretty sure would get this kind of reaction. Should it pop up in a Monster Hunter 6 reveal/trailer. And of course, not to mention something like Kurapeko, who I do dearly miss. No, it was obviously and very evidently the underwater and all of the associated mechanics to do with it, because that was a big departure. And that's something I touched on in my Monster Hunter World 2 versus Monster Hunter 6 discussion, which I'm so happy so many of you liked, because I really do think it is an interesting thought to have. Do you go full crazy out of nowhere, entirely new mechanics, everything's just completely separate and different from World, or do you do something that's much closer Hunter and feels much more like a true spiritual successor to capture the massive Monster Hunter World audience. But as I have highlighted then, what I think is fun to think about is, what about a Monster Hunter 6 where every monster, except the token Rathalos and Rathian, is a new monster? Is that actually something that A, is viable, and B, would be wanted? That kind of try template where they really wanted to define a new generation with a new generation of monsters for it, introducing whole new categories like the Leviathans and the Brute Wyverns. That is kind of ridiculous when you think about it, because Monster Hunter World, Monster Hunter Iceborne, Monster Hunter Rise, Monster Hunter Sunbreak, none of them gave us a new category of monster. And that's actually kind of absurd when you think about it. Such big deal marquee games in Monster Hunter, and yet we didn't actually get a new category. Yes, you could argue Wingdrake was, but they are small monsters, so it's not exactly a big deal there. And yes, they did expand the Fanged Wyverns into be a bit more of a category, but Zinogre's presence still had that on lock. And don't get me wrong, World did a lot of good for a lot of things, monsters included, but yeah, it is weird in hindsight that the entirety of the 5th generation added no new actual archetypes of creature. I mean, maybe not so much weird as it was converting Monster Hunter to this entire new way of existing with World as its new foundation. It could not have been more of a different core to the previous generations, but now with Monster Hunter 6 building on top of that, I think it is clearly the time to put in a new type of monster. This has come up a little bit before, but I think it would not just be weird if it didn't happen, but as far as disappointing. The fact that we have gone through the generation seeing the Fanged Beasts pop up, the monkeys, seeing the Brute Wyverns pop up, the Leviathans, then getting the Amphibians, and the Snake Wyverns, the Temnocerans, and the Neopterans getting their large monsters, and it's so exciting when you have something that isn't literally like anything else you've faced before. And that's something I think needs capturing and expressing in Monster Hunter 6. And that really does weave back to try that however you feel about the underwater, what it did for the monster roster while small, I think it was a really potent lineup. Introducing both Brute Wyverns and Leviathans in one fell swoop is two of the best categories of monster. In fact, I think they might actually be up there if you lose the sort of soft spot nostalgia for Flying Wyverns. And I want so badly Monster Hunter 6 to carve something out like that as well. Getting it in that level of fidelity and quality, but a new, exciting, game-changing type of monster is really fun to me. And where this ties into the actual volume of new versus returning, the idea of actually being very light on returning outside of Rathalos, which is obviously going to happen, though I think a game about Rathalos would be quite the bold move, and not entirely the worst thing, is if you're going to put in new whole categories of monster, obviously, none of the returning monsters fit into them because they're not in this new category because it's new. And you need to populate that new category with a good, decent amount of monsters, otherwise why have you made that new category? Try, when it gave us the Brute Wyverns, started with 3 of them, which is, you know, a nice healthy number, but you totally could have taken more. Leviathans themselves, that the flagship was part of, that was the main draw to power the underwaterness, well, they got 4 members. But when you add those together, well, that's 7 out of 15. That is half the new roster of monsters dedicated to the new categories, which then doesn't leave you a lot of space to do even more new ones, and so on and so forth. Essentially, when I think would I like a Monster Hunter 6 that is filled with the all-stars of Monster Hunter past, Or would I like them to go full try and give us an entirely new roster that's completely out of nowhere and fun and exciting and new categories and new types of monsters to learn from the ground up? I mean, I think I do lean latter, even though I adore so many of Monsters past. I think the base high rank game is a great time to do that, and then the master rank G rank game, bringing all of the good returning ones in, is a kind of best of both worlds almost. And yes, truly the best everything is to have your cake and eat it too, and just have 100 monsters, 50 returning, all the best, 50 new, woohoo! But that's of course not viable. There's only so many monsters that can be made. My only caveat / counter to this is that, given that it is the second game post-World, you kind of expect that perhaps the world monsters will play a little bit heavier, because they're sort of done, they're made, they fit in to the new engine and systems, and can kind of just be plugged in with very minimal effort into new generations going forward, so it'd be very easy to take the best world monsters, put them in Monster Hunter 6, same with the Iceborne ones, just to have a larger roster. And whether having a larger roster for the sake of it is actually ideal is another question in of itself, but I do think perhaps the optimum route, or maybe even the expected route, is a Monster Hunter 6 that has a handful of returning monsters that were in World and Iceborne, some new World and Iceborne monsters, and some of the returning ones that got put in those games, like Tigrex, like Lagaicrus, and then a massive majority are new creations under new skeletons and wyvern something something that gives it that definition as its own, well, beast. I think that would complement actually having this level of expectation and game when it is going to punctuate the 20th anniversary with the 6th gen, with the first post-World Monster Hunter, which I think is the most exciting Monster Hunter because it gets to build on World, and all of the development time can go into expanding what they have already created as opposed to creating it from scratch like they had to do with World. It's something I think is worth thinking about it, and the idea of Monster Hunter 6 being a soft try-to in spirit, even with not a big defining mechanic like underwater, perhaps maybe something subtler and less intrusive on the gameplay we come to expect, but in terms of its new monster philosophy, I could see that working really well, and I would totally be up for it. In any case, let me know what you guys think, but for now, like you've enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.